Hello everybody, my name is Stratnos, and in today's video we're going to talk about raid composition here in Nerub-Ar Palace, what sorts of specs I think people are going to play, what sorts of specs I think people aren't going to play, in the context of high-end mythic progression. In previous tiers, I've done these videos in a bunch of different forms. I've done tier lists, I've done Race to World First raid comp prediction videos, and instead what I want to do with this video is talk about my guild's planned raid comp, which may or may not look pretty similar to what the Race to World First guilds end up using, but I can speak a little bit more to sort of the thought process that we've had as we've kind of finalized things now that the last set of tuning has come into play. So this is Wowhead's raid comp planner tool thing, and the first question that always arises when you're building your comp is how are you going to get access to each of the raid buffs? So you're going to need a mage. This tier, Arcane, has been sort of by far the best looking mage spec for most cases, and I think that's going to be true on Mythic as well. Actually, a couple of the later bosses look pretty good for Frost as well. And the thing is, I'm putting an Arcane mage in this comp, but they can swap to Frost, right? It's not as committal as a class, right? As you can put the same gear on the character and swap around without. I mean, obviously you want some slightly different stats, but it doesn't mean that they can't play Frost in the later bosses. But I think Arcane for most bosses, and probably for all bosses, does look like the main thing that the first mage will play. Now, I do think that you'll likely want to play more than one mage. We certainly do. But the first mage is like really important because they're bringing Arcane Intellect. Further mages beyond that are filling out slots like 16 through 20 rather than slot 1 in the composition in terms of like MVP points. Another decision you need to have is where you're going to bring your warrior buff, Battle Shout. And the answer this tier has looked like Fury is the dominating answer for that. And so the first Fury Warrior slots right into our comp. Again, similar argument as Arcane, which is that it's really good and it has a raid buff we need, so it's right near the top. I'm going to kind of try and put specs in on this in the order of how important they are for the comp. Another thing that you need to decide is where you're going to get your Chaos brand from. This year, I think that it's actually defensible to go with either argument, either the Vengeance or the Havoc. Havoc, I think more guilds are going to use Havoc than Vengeance, but I kind of suspect that guilds that use Vengeance are going to be pretty happy about it. My guild is landing on Havoc for this. We don't really have a Vengeance prepped, and we do have a Havoc main that's good, that's playing Havoc, that we're going to slot in on every boss, and that's going to be our plan. But if I could go back in time like a month, I think there's a decent chance I would be looking to try and make sure we actually have access to a Vengeance as well for this, because, I don't know, I mean, there is a slight buff to Havoc in terms of a bug fix coming next week, but I kind of would love to free up an extra DPS slot for more of these warriors and mages and stuff. Now, the Hunter buff is actually not that good or important on most difficult fights. It's still worth bringing in most cases, but Hunters look kind of beans this tier. You have BM doing really well on pure single target, of which there's one maybe important fight. Next is Princess Kai'Veza, which probably won't even be that difficult, super important. And then the later bosses look kind of, I don't know, I mean, single target is maybe underrated on those fights, so maybe it's fine. But either way, we're going to play one Hunter. I'm going to put it in as MM for now, but obviously I think he's going to play multiple different specs across the different fights, but we'll just put in one Hunter here, mostly because our guild's Hunter. Honestly, I feel like if you're in a guild where your Hunter's not like good and not like one of your best few players, I feel like you could cut the Hunter maybe on Ansarek depending on what the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 damage breakdown is. I feel like if you ever think you don't need damage in P1 at all, which I guess looking at Ansarek you probably do because you're probably pushing based on time rather than percent, then I guess so the Hunter's probably worth. The Hunter's mark is not great, but it's definitely still worth in that spot. Okay, we also need a Rogue. I'm going to actually put Outlaw in as our Rogue spec here, but again, our Rogue's going to be capable of playing all 3 specs depending on what's good for an encounter. Outlaw has been doing really well in the first week. A small nerf was coming for it in Mythic week, and I do think actually Assassination is underrated for how good it'll be on Mythic difficulty of a lot of these encounters, but I do think the Rogue, obviously they're going to swap between them. I'll put in the Outlaw for now. Now we also need a Priest. Healing Priest is how we're going to do this because Shadow looks very bad, so we're going to play a Healing Priest. I'm going to put it in as Disc. obviously, again, capable of playing both, but I think that Disc is the one that you're more likely to see on more of those difficult fights. This tier, you also need a Shaman. Any Shaman will do. Sky Fury is very good. You do need one of them. It's actually hard to say like what the Sky Fury bringing Shaman is for us, because I think we're probably going to play a Resto and an Enhanced Shaman. So I'm going to put both of these in here. And I think also we're going to have access to Elemental Shaman potentially as well. I'll put that in one of these other groups and honestly, Enhance is like depending on whether Enhance or LA is good on a fight, that sort of thing. But for now, I'm going to put that in Group 7 as kind of like one of the specs we have access to, but may or may not use on any given fight. Okay, we're also going to play Warlock. Everybody's always going to play Warlock. Health Stones are good, Summons are good. One Gateway is really good on a lot of fights. Diminishing returns on the Gateway, and of course the Summons and the Health Stones only one is bringing, so it's kind of a raid buff. The Health Stones are kind of a raid buff. I think with incoming buffs to the spec, Demo is actually pretty likely to be the Warlock that gets used on those fights if you can get away with it. AF otherwise, I'm going to put Demo in for this raid comp video, but it could be either way. One elephant in the room is the Augmentation Evoker. Now, I said I was going to do this video kind of in descending order of importance. Slots 1 and 2 actually should have been the two Augmentation Evokers, probably. Those are very, very powerful specs. We'll actually put them in Group 3, which, yeah, this thing is just, it's super good. It's unbelievably good how powerful two Augmentation Evokers are if you're using them well. Mandatory if you're trying to do as good mythic progression as you possibly can, right? Like if you are trying to optimize and you're willing to put in all the annoyance and the work of the Aug Evokers, and you're really trying to push the limits of what you're capable of, the Aug Evokers are just too good to pass up. Okay, so we've got a few more slots here that we need to figure out. We do want a Paladin buff. We're going to play the Holy Paladin for our Pally buff, which, yeah, Holy Pally, sick. It's very good. As a very, very strong healer spec. And they are nerfing them a little bit next week, but Devour is really good. Ret Pally actually a pretty good option as well, but I think a little bit less reliably good than the Holy Pally. I think it's going to fall off a little bit in terms of how much utility, how much value you're getting out of it in super high-end mythic use cases, but also definitely a fine way to bring your Devo aura. Now, we've got a couple more classes to look at. We've got Monk and Druid that we need to pick one of each of these to get our raid buffs. Now again here, Monk, Druid, DH, I think that you could pick one or two of these as your tanks and get your raid buffs there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do it with Guardian Druid, and then we're going to do it with Windwalker Monk as our raid buffs in these spots is the current plan. We do have some hot swap options available for like Feral Druid, Brewmaster Monk. We can hot swap into that if that looks good next week. If Liquid and Echo roll up playing that, we may deploy that swap. We have a couple other hot swaps that we're ready to do as well. And our other tank is going to be a Blood DK is our current plan. We're also ready for that to be a Prot Warrior in that position as well. Blood DK has some strengths with Death Grip, AMZ. This tier doesn't look like Death Grip is too hot. I think what we're going to do is we'll probably play 2 DKs on Brood Twister Ovinax, probably, maybe, because it looks really good. Blood DK looks really sick for that fight. Mass Gripping the Parasites, incredible value. Almost all the other fights, like you're not really doing much with Death Grip. You're not really doing much with Mass Grip. I mean, I guess you are on some of the earlier fights, but those are super easy, so who cares? And Queen Ansarak, that is not a friendly fight to the Blood Death Knight. The feast mechanic in P1 is just absolutely brutal for Blood DK. Now that Death Strike has been nerfed in the way that it has been, that you really feel that nerf there. Death Grip doesn't really do anything on that fight either. So I actually think that dropping the Blood DK for either a raid buff slot or just a tank that you feel is tankier, which I feel like is Prot Warrior, would potentially be a good option. But there's a good chance we'll just play Guardian Blood the whole way through this tier. Guardian Vengeance, I think, would also be a cool and good comp. Guardian Brew, Brew DK, Brew Vengeance, all those sorts of combinations, permutations. Don't really remember the difference between combinations and permutations, but all of those, I think, would be pretty good. Okay, so now we are into our flex spots, and you'll note there's not very many flex positions left. Like you could, if you wanted to count an enhancement out of this group, because we've already got a shaman buff from the Resto Shaman, then we have 1 healer and 5 DPS flex spots. And I guess we could kind of put these flex options down in these lower groups. So I actually forget what our healing last 2 options are going to be. I know one of them is a Pres Evoker, and I think the Pres Evoker is pretty likely to just generally get used. And I kind of forget what our last healer that we've been gearing up and prepping is. So, if you're the healer in my guild that is playing not one of these 4, I don't think too much about the healers. Okay, that's Eve's job. He thinks about the healers. I don't think about the healers. So that's why. It's not that we're not planning to play you at all, although I think there's a pretty good chance that we're going to play these 4 for most of the fights this particular tier. Then we also now need to fill out the rest of our DPS slots as well. So options we're considering for these remaining DPS slots. I think the second Fury Warrior is looking really good. The lights have turned off in this room. We're also we've prepped 2 more Arcane Mages that both have a chance, I think a very good chance, at least one, very likely both, to come in as well. And we have Enhancement, Elemental. We actually have another Shaman as well that I think he's kind of getting ready to play both. But we'll put that in here as Enhancement. But I think you prefer to play Elemental. But Enhancement I think could be better. So we'll see which of those ends up being kind of the one that would get used in that case. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that these... Oh, and of course I forgot about the DPS DK. We have a couple of DPS DKs available, although one of them is missing the first week of Mythic a couple days. One of them is missing the second week of Mythic a couple days. If account sharing was allowed, it'd be very easy. We'd have one DPS DK, they'd share an account, and it'd all be fine and dandy. But of course, that's not allowed, and we would never do that. But that is a little bit of a challenge for us. I think otherwise, if it weren't for that, there's a very good chance that I'd be putting DPS DKs in the kind of guaranteed slot. At least one of them. I guess it's kind of up there with that second Fury Warrior of just really, really good options. I'm going to put 1 enhancement up in here for now. And then I'll basically say, okay, we've got 4 more DPS slots, and we're going to choose 4 of these 7 to fill those slots out. I will put in what I think is most likely to be what we'll use on Queen Ansarek now. I think it's probably going to be Fury, Arcane, another Arcane maybe, and either the DK or another DPS Shaman, something like that. Let's just put in an Ellie Shaman because it's cool to have an Ellie and an Enhance in the comp, although that is a very rare thing to do both of those things. But yes, okay, something like this maybe is what this is going to look like for us, but a lot of caveats applied. We do have another healer that is available as well that I forgot what he's maining, so that's my guild's kind of thought process. That's sort of how we built out this comp, how we have thought about it, some of the decision points that we interacted with going into this tier. We're definitely down a little bit in people, right? You'll notice I only have 23 specs up here. There's a 24th player, but we definitely are down, pretty tight roster this tier. So I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. There's definitely a chance that I have, but that's what happens when you make these videos on the fly and you don't have a resource on the other screen like I should have set up before recording this video. I just YOLO'd it. I hope this video was interesting. I feel like this is kind of a fun way to talk about the raid composition rather than the sort of standard different constructions, the tier list construction that's been used in the past. If you are interested in tier lists, I have been doing the Wowhead raid DPS tier list there, so if you want a quick look at that at the end of this video so you can get mad and downvote this video instead of upvoting it like you were planning on doing, here's what I had for that. A couple of updates I've pushed to this, but I feel like this is kind of a representative. You can see, these were the specs we were thinking about stacking. Multiple of Arms and Frost, both good, but obviously both outshone by Fury and Arcane, and Ellie Shaman and Frost DK also both looking really good. And then, kind of a nice, healthy, big middle of the pack where a lot of other stuff will go. Dev, maybe actually another sleeper spec. We don't have one of these prepped, but if we did, maybe this thing, maybe I'm gonna feel pretty stupid about putting this thing in C tier in a couple of weeks. We'll see. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know if this is sort of an interesting way to talk about the raid comp this tier. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.